Welcome, new and old friends. My name is 242, and tonight, 42 got me one story. It's about a cute little newborn and how everything can go wrong after it comes home. Remember, if you want to help this channel, subscribe, check out my merch and my Patreon. Now, turn off your lights, make sure your doors and windows are locked. Things are about to get spooky. I could hear the man's footsteps as he followed me home from work. So, after I took the knife from my purse, I slowed down and let him catch up. My sister's baby has been talking to me by I Stan Catwoman. When my sister Jillian announced her second pregnancy, I was so happy for her and my brother-in-law. She and her husband Matt already had a 3-year-old son, Jared, who I love to spoil. I was so excited to be an aunt for the second time. Unfortunately, when my sister was in her 7 months of her pregnancy, the world was ravaged by the pandemic, and life seemed to have come to a standstill. Shortly afterwards, Matt was laid off from his job. Jillian worked from home, but her income wasn't nearly enough to pay rent on their 2-bedroom flat. I couldn't bear the thought of my dear sister and her family struggling. I own a 3-bedroom house and invited them to stay with me until the pandemic warned and Matt found a new job. They agreed and soon moved in with me. My sister and brother-in-law took one of the spare bedrooms. My nephew took the other. The new baby would sleep in Jillian's and Matt's room. My dog Nova, a German Shepherd Rottweiler mix, has always been very gentle with Jared. Every time they came over, they had a blast playing together. Under supervision, of course. I often jokingly call Jared Nova's tiny Homan. I was looking forward to how she would react to an even tinier human. 2 months later, Jillian gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Matt was over the moon, and Jared seemed to be excited to have a little sister. I didn't go to the hospital due to the restrictions, and instead got everything that my sister would need ready at home. As soon as their car pulled into the driveway in the early afternoon, Nova tucked her tail between her legs and whined. This was something I had never seen her do. I wanted to comfort her and take care of whatever was bothering her, but I had to go help my sister out of the car while my brother-in-law got the car seat out. Nova ran off into my bedroom and stayed there. Until we had entered the house, I hadn't gotten a good look at my niece. When everything had settled down, I decided to greet the newest addition to the family, Akira. I looked at her little face, ready to introduce myself as her aunt, but something stopped. Akira's glance held an eerie intelligence, a strange sort of awareness, one that didn't seem to fit the contrast of a newborn infant. Her blue eyes seemed to regard me as if she was sizing me up, trying to see if I would be a problem for her. Matt noticed my discomfort and jokingly said, "I didn't know you were that scared of babies." I made an effort to smile and set aside my discomfort. I tickled Akira's little feet and welcomed her to the world. I told myself I was just tired and seeing things. We got Akira into her crib and Jillian settled in to get some sleep. Matt and Jared were playing in the living room, and I went to fill up the water bottle Jillian kept by the bedside. As I was about to exit the room, I heard a female voice say, "Finger!" The voice sounded childlike, but I jumped to the obvious conclusion that it came from my sister. Who else would have said it? I went close to Jillian and asked if she needed anything, but she was asleep. Then I heard it again. "Finger! Finger!" I froze when I realized it came from the crib. I looked in, and baby Kira looked me in the eyes and said once again, "Finger!" I just stood there. It was as if my brain could not process what it had seen and heard. I stumbled out of the room. I went downstairs and asked Matt if it was normal for newborn babies to talk. He looked at me like I had two heads and asked, "What?" I realized how ridiculous that question sounded and just replied, "Oh, nothing." The baby monitor hadn't been installed yet, and he obviously didn't hear the baby talk. I should mention that the entire time, Nova refused to leave my room. She stayed near the bed with her ears perked up. Since the day Akira entered my house, Nova only left the room to go outside. She would do her business and then rush upstairs to the safety of my bedroom. The next morning, we were all sitting at the breakfast table. And of course, the baby was there too. I was slicing up some more apples when the larger butcher knife I kept in a knife case fell on my finger. Let me rephrase that. The knife seemed to jump out of the case and the sharp edge landed on my finger. It caused a large and deep cut, and in seconds the cutting board and the apple slices were painted crimson. Jillian and Matt rushed to check on me. Jillian asked why on earth I was using such a big butcher's knife to cut apples. I wanted to tell her that this inanimate cutting instrument had pretty much attacked me, but I bit my tongue as I had started to question my own sanity. But then, as Matt was bandaging my finger, I looked at Akira. I didn't know it was possible for a baby to look evil, but that's exactly how Akira looked. And I don't mean, F you, I'm going to start crying at 3 a.m. kind of evil. This was a look of, which I'm just getting started. For the next few days, life went on as normal. I tried to explain away the incidents that had occurred just days prior. Akira really hadn't said anything. My tired brain was just playing tricks on me. The butcher's knife hadn't been properly placed in the case, so it fell on my hand. The baby hadn't given me any kind of look. It was probably just babies making a weird face. Babies make weird faces all the time. And Nova was probably just sick or something. I spoke to her vet and he agreed to let me bring her to his house for a quick checkup. As we drove to the vet's house, the old Nova seemed to have returned. She thoroughly enjoyed the drive as she always did. She looked out the window as her ears blew in the wind and pawed at my hand asking for pets. The vet examined her and told me nothing seemed to be wrong. He asked me about her food intake and bowel movements and told me that too didn't show a sign of illness. On the drive back, Nova was her playful self until we got to the front door. She seemed reluctant to go in. I had to pull her inside by her leash. Jillian greeted me and asked me if Nova was okay. I told her she was fine even as Nova rushed upstairs. Matt was in the kitchen making dinner. Jillian and Jared were playing on the living room floor as Akira was in her bassinet, grumbling like any other baby. I felt guilty for having those awful thoughts about her. Jillian's phone rang and she went to answer it. I decided to play with the baby. I touched her little cheeks when she suddenly said, "Chest!" I withdrew my hand immediately in fear. She once again gave me that evil smile. I looked at Jared to see if he had heard it, but he seemed lost in his own make-believe world. Jillian was coming back into the living room when the chest of the drawers in the hallway that were leaning against the wall fell over. From my point of view, it looked like it was pulled down by an invisible force. The chest was heavy and sturdy, and there was no explanation for the toppling over like that. Thankfully, it missed her, but only by a few inches. Matt ran into the hallway to check on Jillian as I did. Even Jared was pulled out of his childish fantasy. We asked Jillian if she was okay, and Matt asked how the chest had fallen. As we picked up the chest and the items that had fallen out, Akira's chest replayed in my mind over and over again. Jillian went back to playing with Jared and Matt went to the kitchen. When I looked into the bassinet again, Akira was grinning from ear to ear. The grin was one that I'm sure was impossible for a baby to produce. But there it was. I decided to take a leaf out of my dog's playbook and keep my distance from Akira. I would avoid going near her. When Matt and Jillian played with her, I would only smile from a safe distance. Or I would simply interact with Jared instead. I tried to disguise my aversion, but my sister still noticed. One evening, she asked me point blank why I had been so distant from her daughter. I tried to come up with some BS excuse, but she was clearly hurt by my behavior. She said, "I just thought you should interact with her while she was staying here. Who knows when we'll get to spend so much time together once Matt gets another job and the lockdown is lifted." I accepted defeat and promised her I would make more of an effort to spend time with Akira. I felt something rise in the pit of my stomach, even as the words came out of my mouth. The next morning, after breakfast, I decided to fulfill my promise. I cooed over Akira and tickled her tiny feet, even as my fingers trembled. I tried to keep a smile on my face and play the loving act. Jillian looked pleased at this. I was baby talking to Akira as Jillian exited the kitchen to go talk to her husband. As soon as she was out of earshot, Akira spoke. She uttered an almost adult sounding, "You think you're funny?" I recoiled. I decided to speak to this creature and ask her what in heck she wanted. Akira just smiled, the same cryptic smile. Then she blurted out, "Screw! Screw! Screw!" She said over and over while cocking her head from side to side in a singular, unsettling fashion. I stood up and decided to go get Jillian. I had just had dialogue with what was supposed to be a newborn baby. I needed to lie down. That night, I sat in bed with Nova at my side. I searched the internet for symptoms of mental illness that might be causing me to see and hear things. Well, on another tab, I was searching for unusual behaviors from babies. On yet another tab, I was looking for myths and legends about evil babies. At this point, I honestly was losing my mind, but it turned out that I would not have to wonder whether I was going crazy or not for too long. At around 2 in the morning, I heard shuffling noises from downstairs. I wondered if it was a burglar. I quietly went downstairs, wielding a sledgehammer in one hand and a can of pepper spray in the other. What I saw was scarier than any intruder could ever be. It was the baby. My sister's barely a month-old baby. She was crawling on the wall from the living room to Jillian and Matt's room. She looked like some kind of fleshy spider. She certainly moved with the speed of one. The thing crawled back into the room without making a sound. I stood there. I couldn't feel my hands and feet and felt dizzy after what I had seen. I collapsed right there on the staircase. I sat there for a while before it struck me that I should check what that thing had been doing in the living room. I investigated every electrical appliance. I went to the kitchen to check for a gas leak. Everything seemed as it should be. I went back to my bedroom, but sleep was elusive. Even though my door was locked, I kept thinking I would see that thing crawling on my ceiling. I was insanely grateful to be able to cuddle with my beloved dog for comfort. The next morning, I looked like heck. Not only was I awake all night, I had also spent the last few hours gripped in overwhelming fear. My sister asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine and that I just couldn't sleep. As if on cue, the reason for my haggard appearance was brought into the living room by Matt. Little Akira, blood-curdling, scary baby Akira, was in her little bassinet, looking as harmless as any newborn. After breakfast, we all sat in the living room to watch TV. Even as we chatted and laughed, my eyes were constantly drawn to the baby. I kept looking for any more signs of evil I had caught glimpses of. Nothing. She just gurgled and cooed. Matt got up to get some water from the kitchen, and as he was coming back, he suddenly stopped and yelled at all of us to get up and away from the sofas. He was so hysterical that we did what he asked immediately. Our confusion lasted but a few seconds when the chandelier just above the couch fell and shattered into 1,000 pieces. Glass shards fell everywhere, and while no one was harmed, little Jared was clearly terrified and began to cry. While Jillian attended to him, Matt and I tried to figure out how the heck this had happened. The chandelier had been there ever since I bought the house 3 years ago and never even looked like it was unstable or poorly attached. Matt told me that he saw it was just hanging on for dear life when he told us to get away. Then I remembered what Akira had said the day before. Screw! I remember what I had seen last night and put 2 and 2 together. This chandelier weighed about 50 pounds and was suspended 14 feet above the ground. If it fell on any of us, it could have done some serious, even permanent damage. I shuddered when I considered that it could have fallen on Jared. I was now well and truly terrified of what Akira was capable of doing. Later on, after everyone had calmed down and we had vacuumed the entire living room to get every tiny piece of glass off the floor, I asked Jillian if she had heard any movement the previous night, or if she had saw something unusual. Of course, she said she didn't. She was fast asleep. I didn't know what I was expecting her to say. Matt was holding Akira, trying to get her to burp. His back was turned towards me, but Akira looked right at me. Once again, she gave me that toothless grin, as if daring me to say something, to tell my sister and brother-in-law what I had seen last night. I decided to take Nova outside for her business. Though I was almost convinced that Akira was doing all of this, and that what I had seen last night was real, I wasn't free from the sliver of doubt that I may have hallucinated and was mentally ill. I both hoped and feared that it was the case, because I hated to imagine what it would mean if the other possibility was true. If Akira was some kind of being, what it would mean for my family. As Matt and I made dinner and Jillian did the dishes, the baby was on the kitchen table in her bassinet. We suddenly heard Jared scream from his bedroom. He was jumping on the bed, and just beneath the covers was broken glass. The same broken glass that we had thrown in the trash that very morning. It had pierced his skin, and pieces were lodged into his flesh. "What is happening in this house?" Jillian yelled at no one in particular. She and Matt wondered out loud how the heck had the glass gotten there. They asked Jared if he had done it, and he said no through sob. Matt went into the kitchen to get his cell phone. He came back into the bedroom and asked if anyone had moved the baby. Jillian and I exchanged looks and said no. Matt said the baby wasn't in the bassinet. Jillian rushed into their bedroom, I suppose to check in the crib if the baby had somehow got there by herself. Unbeknownst to them, that was certainly a possibility. I stayed with Jared and tried to comfort him while we tried to get the glass pieces out of his feet. A few minutes later, Jillian and Matt re-entered the room and asked if I had opened the kitchen window. I told them I hadn't. Jillian called 911 as Matt ran outside. She told the dispatcher that someone had broken into the house and stolen her baby. She finished the call and asked me, in a state of hysteria, if I was sure I hadn't opened the window. I once again told her I hadn't. She broke down and started crying. She wondered out loud what was happening to her family. I didn't know if I should comfort my sister or her son, who is still crying. Matt came back in, out of breath, and said he hadn't found anything. Of course he hadn't. That thing moved fast. I had seen it with my own eyes. The cops questioned all three of us. They said something along the lines of how the abductor couldn't have gone far, but I blocked it all out. All I could think was that now that thing was out there, it was in the form of the most harmless thing in the world and can use that to its advantage. It's been weeks since the incident. Matt and Jillian have been alternating between blaming and comforting each other. Jared spends most of his time with me. I've been keeping a keen eye on the local news. There has been a marked increase in people dying in house fires and freak accidents in the city. Anytime I read about them, I can't help but wonder if the last thing those people saw was a tiny baby crawling all over their walls. To all of those who are listening to this, if you see a baby that looks a bit too aware, if it is smiling in a way that babies just shouldn't, run. If you don't have the heart to kill it, just get the heck away from it. You don't know what it's capable of, and to be honest, neither do I. Another young couple came in through the door, and I hurried to get the table ready, sighing. Weekends are always so busy. Car accidents, murders, drug overdoses, it's always the worst shift in the morgue. I wonder what creature that baby was. Do you have any idea? Tell me down below. Also, tell me what you would do with a baby like this. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and make sure it feels it. Subscribe and turn that pretty little bell to all notifications so you don't miss the next story. If you want something with my avatars on it, check out my merch. 2 links for 2 different price points. If you want early access or a few other bonuses, check out my Patreon. But as always, thank you for watching. Come back this Freaky Friday for our day stories. I'm feeling a little malicious compliance. How about you? Sleep tight and don't let 42 bite.